Welcome back. This is day 3 of Ecology, and today we're going to be talking about how is energy transferred in an ecosystem. But before we get to that, you guys have got 3 do not questions, so go ahead and pause this video. Answer questions 1 through 3 and press play when you're ready to review them. All right, now before we get started, I am going to warn you guys. I just consumed 2 pieces of pizza faster than any human should physically be able to. So if you notice me struggling to breathe at all during this video, I'm fine. I'm just slowly but surely entering into a food coma. So we're gonna power through. We're gonna get through this together. Now, number 1, wombats are classified as herbivores because they can what? So in this picture, we're looking at an energy pyramid, which we know is separated into different trophic levels. So this first trophic level down here at the bottom is where we find our producers. We see that it's full of plants or autotrophs. But then this second trophic level is filled with organisms that eat those plants or those producers. And we call organisms that eat plants herbivores. Okay, but then our third trophic level is filled with organisms that eat those herbivores. So because they're eating other animals, they're eating meat, we're going to call them carnivores. But I do want to be clear, both of these trophic levels right here are still classified as consumers. Okay, they're just different types of consumers based on what they eat. But now back to our lovely wombat. Why is our wombat classified as an herbivore? Well, whenever we see this word herb, we're talking about plants. So herbivores are animals that eat plants. So wombats are classified as herbivores here because they get nutrition from the grasses and sedges. These are 2 examples of plants that we see on our first trophic level. That's what they eat. All right, number 2, which characteristic of a geographic region would have the greatest influence on the type of ecosystem that forms in that region? Well, we've got different types of ecosystems all around us. We've got forest ecosystems, we've got aquatic ecosystems, we've got desert ecosystems. And all of those different ecosystems are formed based on the climatic conditions or the climate of that area. Okay, the climate's going to determine what plants are growing in that region and what animals are able to survive in that region. So it all comes down to the climatic conditions that influence that environment. All right, and number 3, which group would most likely be represented in a food chain? So we saw a food chain in our day 1 notes, right? We saw a mouse that was eating a piece of corn. And then that mouse was actually, go back. That mouse was, oh my God. That mouse was actually eaten by a snake. Kind of looks like a balloon, but we're gonna go with it. And then that snake was actually eaten by a hawk or an eagle or an owl, I think it actually was. Just choose your own bird. So what do all of those organisms have in common? Well, the fact that they are living organisms. So which one of these words means living? Well, it's going to be biotic factors. All of these organisms, the animals and as well as the corn, are living things. So we're going to call them biotic factors. All right, moving on to part A. The first thing we're going to do today is read through. I can't erase that. Oh, I can color it white though. Yeah. All right. The first thing we're going to do today is read through this part A called energy transfer. And as we read through this, I want you guys to underline anything you think is important and fill in the blanks as we go along. All right. So no matter how complex a food web is, energy always moves in one direction, from lower to higher trophic levels. And this is why we use those arrows, right, to show the transfer or the flow of energy. And it's always going to go from lower to higher trophic levels. It does not get recycled. As energy moves through each trophic level, some of it is used and some of it is lost as heat. The most energy is present at the lowest trophic level. Now, what was that first trophic level that we saw on our energy pyramid? Well, that first trophic level is always going to be our producers. So the most energy is actually present with our producers, which we can also classify as autotrophs because they're making their own food through that process of photosynthesis. Okay, but we also know that energy is going to be moving up throughout those trophic levels. It's going to move to the higher ones, which means that the least energy is also present at the highest trophic level. Now, what did we find at our highest trophic level as energy moved through that food chain? Well, that's where we find our carnivores. So the least energy is actually present with our carnivores, which we can classify as heterotrophs because they have to eat other organisms to get food. I'm sorry, to get energy. But for this reason, and this is super important, additional energy must constantly enter an ecosystem. But where does the ecosystem get that energy from? What do we think? Oh, mainly in the form of sunlight. So solar energy is going to be super, super important. And this is why we need plants, right? Because through the process of photosynthesis, plants are actually able to convert this solar energy into chemical energy that we can use. Okay, so I'm going to draw a little plant here to show that's what the plant's doing. But plants can convert solar energy from the sun into chemical energy through that process of photosynthesis. And that's how additional energy continues to enter the ecosystem. But unfortunately, there is a hidden danger in many food chains. So if a long-lasting chemical like DDT, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, enters the environment, it may get passed on from one trophic level to the next. And what ends up happening is the level of the chemical in each organism actually increases as it moves up through those trophic levels because the organisms at the top of the food chain consume more of those infected organisms than the lower trophic levels do. And this process is known as biomagnification, which you can actually see happening here in this picture at the bottom. So if there's any sort of toxin present in these mayflies, right, it looks like they're eating oil or something. So they're ingesting a little bit of that toxin, but overall, it's not too much present. But the problem is these bluegills are going to be eating a lot of mayflies. And as they do that, they're going to ingest a higher amount of toxins that all of these mayflies have eaten. Same thing happens as we continue to move up the food chain. These, I always forget the pronunciation here. It's a bass guitar or bass fish. It's a bass fish. There we go. So the bass fish has to eat more of these bluegills in order to get enough energy and consume enough food. So as he eats more of these bluegills that have all been exposed to these toxins, he's going to ingest more as well. Which means by the time it gets to us humans, if we eat this bass fish that has got about halfway filled with toxins, our toxin levels increase too because we're eating more of these diseased fish and we are in turn getting those toxins as well. Okay, so this same thing actually happens with microplastics in the ocean. As fish consume microplastics that are found in the ocean. Okay, and we will talk more about biomagnification more tomorrow, but this is a huge concern, right? And something that affects every single organism that's a part of the food chain because although these flies just ingested a little bit of this toxin, we can see the effect that it's having here on humans as every single one of these fish and every single one of these organisms is exposed to the toxins that these mayflies ingested, okay? But again, we'll talk more about that tomorrow because it can be kind of a tricky concept. So now we're gonna work through some practice questions. So follow along with me as we answer these together. Number one, base your answers to the following questions on the diagrams below and on your knowledge of biology. The diagrams represent how various populations interact in a forest environment. So which diagram, A or B, most accurately represents interactions between biotic and abiotic factors in a forest environment? Well, remember that whenever you see this word biotic, we're talking about living things. And whenever we see this word abiotic, we're talking about non-living things. And I also want to be clear that what is this diagram called? What are we actually looking at? Well, we're looking at a food web. We're looking at all of the different interactions between these organisms. So now I want you to pause this video and tell me, which one do you think most accurately represents these interactions? Is it diagram A or diagram B? And press play when you're ready to go over it. Well, diagram A is actually the only diagram here that shows those abiotic factors, those non-living factors. So you should have said something along the lines of diagram A actually shows these interactions between abiotic factors like the sun and these raw materials from the soil and the biotic factors. There are actually no abiotic factors shown in diagram B. So again, the sun and these raw materials are abiotic, but in diagram B, we only see living or biotic factors. So diagram A is the only one that shows the Shows those relationships between biotic and abiotic factors. Moving on to the next one. Wow, this diagram did not copy well, but using that same image, state what would likely happen to one other population in this food web if all of the squirrels and rabbits were suddenly killed by a viral disease, and support your answer. I'm actually going to go back over here and we're going to use diagram A, okay? So if all of the squirrels and rabbits were suddenly killed, what would happen? I'm going to put a big red X over these organisms. Now, look at what animals are connected to the squirrels and the rabbits. Well, we've got foxes. The foxes eat the squirrels. Okay. The cougars eat the squirrels. The weasels eat the squirrels. The weasels eat the rabbits as well. And so what's going to happen? It actually looks like the weasels only eat squirrels and rabbits. So what's going to happen to these populations? Well, let's also look at what happens to these producer populations as well. So squirrels eat these hickory trees and nuts. Rabbits eat the berry bushes and berries. Squirrels also eat these oak trees and acorns. So if suddenly the squirrels and rabbits disappear from this ecosystem, what's going to happen? What do we think? Well, you could have taken several different options here, kind of a choose your own adventure, if you will. So you could have mentioned the fox and weasel and cougar populations, right? We saw that they were connected to those squirrels and rabbits. And if they don't have any food, those populations are going to decrease. So the fox, weasel, and cougar populations that we saw right here would decrease because their food sources of those squirrels and rabbits are gone. They don't have enough food to survive. So we're going to see those populations decrease. We would also see the oak trees populations increase, those producers, because there would be more acorns. They're not being eaten as often by those squirrels. So we're going to see those oak tree populations increase. You could have also mentioned the deer population. You could have also said that deer would increase because there would be less competition for available food. So you can see right here that this food web is what really shows us the interdependence of these organisms and how every single one of these animals was connected. Okay, and that's why we really prefer to use food webs rather than food chains, because you can see all of the different options in this ecosystem and how just the disappearance of one animal can impact several other species. All right, now number 3, if this forest community experienced a severe lack of rain throughout the spring and summer seasons, state what effect this drought could have on the grouse population and support your answer. So again, I'm going to go back to our bigger diagram here. We've got our grouse up here in the corner. I'll color them in black. So what's going to happen to our grouse population if there is a drought? Well, think about what's going to happen in a drought. There's not enough rain. What organisms need rain? Well, a lack of rain could cause these plants to die off, which would decrease the food available for the beetles, which would then die off, causing the grouse population to also decrease. So again, this shows us how all of these populations are affected. Even though the grouse doesn't necessarily eat the plants, it does eat beetles, which do eat the plants. So if there's not enough plants for the food, if there's not enough food for the beetles to eat, these beetles are going to die, which means if the beetles die, the grouse aren't going to have any food either, which means they are also going to die, or at least they're going to struggle to survive. So again, this shows us that every single one of these organisms is connected. And now number 4, state one possible reason why the deer population could remain relatively constant, even though the number of berry bushes and berries varied from year to year. So if their food sources are changing, why do you think the deer populations could remain stable? Let's take another look at our diagram, right? I'm gonna circle our deer in blue. So we see that these deer can eat hickory trees and nuts. They can eat the oak trees and acorns. They can eat the berry bushes and berries. So why might they survive? Why might they be okay? Well, those deer are going to be okay because, as we just saw, they actually had a pretty good number of food sources. So if there are not enough berries, then the deer can just move on and eat more acorns and more hickory nuts. So because those deer have other food sources, their populations are going to remain pretty stable, regardless of those fluctuations in producers. Okay, but so because they had a variation of foods that they could eat, they're going to be okay in the long run. All right, moving on to number 5. So base your answer to the following questions on the table below and on your knowledge of biology. Species A, B, and C are all different heterotrophs. What does that word mean? Well, troph is referring to feeding or food, and hetero means different. So we know that heterotrophs are going to be consumers. They have to eat other organisms to get their energy. Okay, so these are heterotrophs or consumers involved in the same food chain in an ecosystem. The table below shows all the populations of each of these species on one summer day. So we see that amongst these heterotroph populations, species A has a population of 85, species B has a population of 847. Wow, good for them. Species C has a population of 6, and species D has a population of 116. So I do want to ask you, which species amongst these is most likely an herbivore? And support your answer with data from the table. Well, what does this word herbivore mean? Remember, when we see herb, we're talking about plants. So herbivores are animals that eat plants. So what do you think? Which species is likely an herbivore? Think about what we know about our energy pyramid. That is ugly. Let's see if I can do that again. All right, what do we know? Well, species B is likely the herbivores here because we know that in a food pyramid, the largest population of heterotrophs is going to be the herbivores, right? We know that we're going to find plants here in the bottom, but then amongst our consumers, our herbivores are going to be the next biggest row. Okay, so because we're only looking at heterotrophs here, we're only looking at the consumers, the largest population of heterotrophs is going to be the herbivores, and that is species B. Species B has 847 people or organisms. They're doing pretty well, but because they have the most organisms, we can infer that those are going to be our herbivores. All right, and number 6, there are groups of organisms that must be present in this ecosystem that are not shown in the table. Identify one of these groups of organisms and state the role of this group in the ecosystem. So here we're only looking at herbivores. We're only looking at heterotrophs, but there are other types of animals or organisms in our ecosystem. What are they? There are a few different options here. You could have said producers, right? Producers are going to be found down here at our bottom level of the energy pyramid. And these are those plants that are going to capture energy from the sun and provide food for other organisms in the ecosystem. So they are, through the process of photosynthesis, converting that light or that solar energy into chemical energy that we can use. But you also could have mentioned decomposers. And decomposers, remember, are things like fungi or bacteria or worms that actually recycle the remains of dead organisms, and they break down those dead organisms. And through this, they're going to recycle those nutrients and raw materials back into the environment so that those nutrients can be used again. All right. And that, I believe, is all I've got for you guys today. So go ahead and answer your exit ticket. If you have any questions, please let me know. But other than that, have a wonderful day. And I should mention, this is your asynchronous assignment, okay? So in addition to watching this video and completing your notes, please make sure you also complete your Castle Learning assignment as well. I'm gonna jot that down on the screen. All right, so on Friday, or today, depending on when you're watching it, or this weekend, make sure you complete your Castle Learning for day 3 as well. All right. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend. And I will see you guys again on Monday. Bye, guys.